Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. As usual, welcome to another visit to us in the House Finance Committee in room 35. What we're going to do first is take the attendance to roll to see if we have a quorum. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Yeah. Chairman Abney,
Present.
Vice Chair Slater,
Present.
Vice Chair Ccri,
Present.
Representative Amore, Representative Baginski,
Present.
Representative Barrows,
Present.
Representative Diaz, Representative Edwards,
Here.
Representative Hall,
Here.
Representative Nadone, Representative O'Brien,
Here.
Representative Quattrucci, Representative Ruggiero,
Present.
Representative Tabone,
Present.
Representative Ella Wilkinson, and Leader Filippi. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clerk. I think Representative Diaz had to go upstairs for a meeting. She'll come back. Okay, thank you very much. The next thing we'll do is we have a bill tonight before I do my opening remarks. It's Bill 5224 that we'll need to hold for further study. But this bill is by Shekarchi, and it's identical to Article 1, Section 15 of the budget, which Sharon is going to go over tonight. So this bill is part of her discussion, so we won't have to discuss the bill until we have finished all the other things that we're doing at this point. But again, tonight is one of those evenings where we are still going over the budget, making sure that some of the articles that are in the budget is understood by those of us who've been here for a while and those of us who have not. And this is our chance to get an explanation from Sharon over what we need to know. As you know, several weeks ago, all of the members got the first glance and a second glance at the budget, and this begins to put color to it to help it make sense as to what it all really means. So that's the real reason that we do these. Also, if you have any questions of Sharon, even as she's moving through her presentation, if something hits you and you don't understand it, she doesn't mind if you stop her a few times and ask, so that as we go on, we'll have a better understanding of what we're doing. At the end of that particular time, then we'll have to go into the session where you can ask questions of the administration. But before doing that, I'll need to get a roll call vote on the...
Chairman, could I make a motion to hold H5224 for further study?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, moved by Vice Chair Slater and seconded by Chairwoman Deborah Giro, that we hold Bill 5224 for further study. Would you please call the roll, sir?
Chairman Abney,
Yes.
Vice Chair Slater,
Yes.
Vice Chair Ccri,
Yes.
Representative Amore, Representative Baginski,
Yes.
Representative Barrows,
Yes.
Representative Diaz, Representative Edwards,
Yes.
Representative Hall,
Yes.
Representative Nadone,
Yes.
Representative O'Brien,
Yes.
Representative Quattrucci, Representative Ruggiero,
Aye.
Representative Tabone,
Yes.
Representative Ella Wilkinson, and Leader Filippi. Okay, good.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Clerk. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sharon, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. On the agenda this evening, you have a couple of budget article sections as well as House Bill 2224, which, as you mentioned, is identical to Article 1, Section 15. So we'll jump right into that one. That deals with the Rhode Island Promise program. Just by way of recap, you've heard this summary from us before, but this was authorized back in 2017. It provides 2 years of free tuition and mandatory fees at Ccri for qualifying Rhode Island students. It's a last dollar scholarship model, which essentially means that once a student has exhausted all other aid sources, the state picks up the remainder of the bill. Recipients do need to maintain a 2.5 grade point average, commit to remaining in Rhode Island after graduation, and remain on track to graduate. There have always been exceptions to the eligibility criteria, allowing for certain medical and personal leaves, military leave, and accommodations for students with disabilities, allowing them to remain eligible for a lower number of credits over the course of 2 years. in recent discussions with CCRI, they were updating their policy to make sure that the accommodation is based on total number of credits, not years. So originally authorized for four cohorts of students starting in the fall of 2017, with the last cohort originally scheduled to enter in the fall of 2020. In the budget approved in December, the 2020 Assembly extended to an additional cohort. The funding is for for full cohorts at any given time has been running about a little over $7 million. You can see that first year was just the first cohort. So Section 15 removes the sunset, effectively making the program permanent. And this was proposed as part of Governor Raimondo's budget. The Assembly acted to, as I mentioned, extend just to one additional class. So House Bill 5224, which is sponsored by Speaker Shekarchi, also proposes to make the Promise program permanent. So I'm just going to go over just for interest and then potentially if you have questions, we have some data on participation based on reporting that's been done over time. And we report that as the school does in terms of cohorts. So the class entering in the fall of 2017 was cohort 1, and then the data follows them through their 4 semesters at CCRI. Cohort 2 starts in fall of 2018, and you can see it shows you what percentage of students remained and were able to graduate or remained and earned credits. You can see that on this slide, and there'll be discussion about this, is the total enrollment of students into Promise as a program is larger than what we call the Promise only, and that is the students for whom the state actually pays. So students enrolling are all considered Promise, but the program only pays for those who need the money. So if you already have Pell Grants that cover your costs, you may receive the wraparound services that have to do with Promise and get counted in a total, but the money only goes to the Promise only, and so those are the students for whom their aid does not cover their total expenses. So that's the distinction there, and the data is tracked separately for anyone who's interested. The third cohort started with almost 2,600 students, with 42% of them fully funded by Promise. The November 2020 report, that was the last formal report issued to the Assembly. They are required in both May and November of each year. Included these projections for cohort 3. We do have some updated information, which we'll show you here that we just got. So sometimes there's a lag in sorting out exactly how many students the state ended up paying for. It takes a while after the semester closes, so there's a little bit of a change in the number of students in each subset. And we just show that change for you from the November report. So the spring 2020 enrollment was lower than projected in the November 2020 report. And then the next 2 semesters suggest improved retention from the November projections, but it does seem to be similar to other retention in other cohorts. And the 4th Promise cohort is expected to be similar to the prior 2. And then in terms of financing, you see how the costs increase essentially by enrollment increases and any tuition increases, with funding for each cohort appearing in 2 fiscal years. And for the out years, because the proposal here lifts the sunset, you can see that the out year projections show what the program may cost over time. And it assumes about a 2% growth. Now, historic tuition growth has run closer to 3%, but it's likely there's some enrollment declines baked into this, as with local education aid projections in the governor's out-year forecast. They are assuming a modest decline in K-12 enrollment, so that's why that's only at about 2%, I believe. So moving on to Article 4, dealing with Public Debt Management Act, which is essentially two projects that have to do with URI that will look familiar to you as we go through them. But just a quick recap on the Public Debt Management Act. That's a provision of state law that ensures that debt with any kind of state tie doesn't get issued without some sort of legislative review. There are certain exemptions, but you have proposals like these before you annually. Governor's budget has 5 distinct proposals. 2 of them are before you this evening, and they deal with projects for URI, the Memorial Union, and the Health and Counseling Center projects. If these sound familiar, they are, because there is a current authority, and this would increase on both of them the amount of debt that can be issued. Starting with the URI project, the Memorial Union renovation, back in 2019, you authorized a borrowing of $51.5 million through revenue bonds as part of a greater $62.5 million project to renovate and expand the student union. This was approved the same time as the health center project, and the initial plan, as was presented, was to proceed on both at the same time. When URI was developing submitted its capital budget for fiscal 21, it included that same plan, but then subsequently indicated it was going to delay this project 1 year, although that didn't actually show up as a delay in the governor's capital budget. The idea behind the delay was to stagger the debt issuances for this and the health center project and avoid student fee increases on both projects simultaneously. As we'll talk about momentarily, COVID further delayed the health center project, which further delays the Memorial Union project. So what you have before you is a project that's expected to start in fiscal 22 and end several years later, and an article that increases the borrowing authority because of that delay. So the borrowing authority would be increased by $6.1 million up to $57.6 million. The increased debt service associated with this adjustment is about $400,000 annually. It turns out to be almost a 30-month delay, which the cost of the project is showing 9.8% escalation to properly account for the delay. And so all of those numbers change because of that. The annual debt service on the full amount, so the original plus the extra, is $4.2 million. This assumes debt over 30 years and a maximum 6% interest. This is the same as was you approved for 2019. The student union fees, retail leases for vendors are all the revenues that would go to support the debt. There's no expectation of state general revenues, but fees would support this. Little background on the Memorial Union, built back in 1953 with additions in 63 and 91. And a reminder that the union is what we call an auxiliary enterprise, and under state law, it must be self-supporting. So you're not putting general revenues or RICAP on a project like this. It has an operating budget of about $5.4 million and a staff of nearly 30. It's supported by student fees. Those went up $10, and every $10 increase would generate an additional about $150,000 in revenues. Thinking about how the debt service would be paid for, you can just see this picture of the operating budget. Moving to the Combined Health and Counseling Center, again, as I mentioned, this was also part of the 19 authorization, $26.9 million, part of a $33 million project. To construct a new centralized location for physical, mental, and emotional health. The capital budget did delay it 1 year last year. The current capital budget is for another delay. Most of that is related to the COVID-19 emergency. Work had begun on design and then was suspended. The design is also apparently impacted by some new considerations regarding COVID. And so I'm sure the university will speak to those issues. Article 4 before you would increase the authorization for debt by $2.1 million to $29 million, and that increment is about $200,000 more in debt service. In this case, it's a 19-month delay, showing up as a 6% cost increase on the project itself. And again, as we discussed with Memorial Union, the annual debt service full amount is $2.1 million for this project. Same as considerations, 30 years, 6% maximum interest, and again, supported by student fees. Currently, the student health fee is $608. It's $33 higher than it had been in 2020. And just like the Memorial Union, $10 equals about $150,000 in revenues. The health service is currently in the Potter Building, and the counseling service is in Roosevelt Hall. This would combine the operations and staffing, attempting to get some efficiencies as well, which may offer some savings towards the debt service. And as with Memorial Union, we'll just show you a little snapshot of the operating budget for this auxiliary enterprise. And just big picture, unrestricted debt service, so things the state may participate in paying for, the GO bonds, other debt, and debt used for energy efficiency projects has grown over time. As you know, you've put a lot of projects on the ballot for the university. And then the self-supporting operations, the debt service associated with those are summarized here. Most of that is on the dorms, but there's small amounts for other activities. With that, that concludes our presentation. Happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for your presentation, Sharon. I do have one question that's important, and it's on page 2, and it's slide number 3, I think it is. Yeah, and it talks about the Promise program, but it talks about maintaining a grade point average. This was discussed a lot several years ago when we were first looking at this, and it ended up being like a 2.5 grade point average. But do we know if that's just the general grade point average, or if you're in specific programs, are the grade point averages that's required to remain in a Promise program, and is that different if you're in nursing or something of that sort? Would your grade point have to be higher, and who decides that?
Well, your current law, and as would be proposed here, it says 2.5 in the law. If the school has alternate higher minimums, then that would be something the school could answer. But this is the minimum, and it's in the law.
Okay, great. I thought so, and that's probably something that Jonathan and his crew may be able to answer, because I do get questions on that specific thing of, do I need to maintain a certain grade point average to still remain as a Promise student? And I just remember there was a lot of discussion with us about the 2.5 average. Some cases it was lower, some cases it was higher, but I just want to be sure that we're all operating on the same sheet of music, so I'll ask Jonathan that question. Any other questions? I think Jay had his hand up first, and then Whip Everett.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 11, slide 21, talk about the $6 million from auxiliary balances. Is any of that coming in from third-party insurance companies, or is it strictly from fees?
So I'm not sure if a part of the revenue that does accrue to this entity includes some third-party billings. I'm sure they could answer that for you, but it's primarily fees, I believe.
Thank you, Chairman.
Get on mic here. I think Chairwoman Ruggiero and then Rep. Hall.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Sharon, back to slide 3, page 2. One of the other requirements is that the recipients of the Promise program have to commit to remaining in Rhode Island after graduation. And I'm not sure you can answer this, it might be Jonathan, but how are we tracking that, and how do we know that?
So that's a great question. Representatives from CCRI are also on the meeting, ready to answer your questions. I think they'll be best to address that.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Mister.
Quite welcome. I'm going to Chairman Hull, and then to, you still want your question? Okay, great. Chairman Hull, then Chairwoman Diaz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Sharon, if I'm not mistaken, you talked about a wraparound. Is it true that they have to fill out the FAFSA form prior to getting any?
That's a requirement.
That
yes.
is a requirement. So, and once that requirement's met, they then are eligible for the money. It's after the first money's been spent, correct? Or added to their bill.
So the FAFSA will let the college know if the student is eligible for another form of aid, and then, yes, one follows the other.
Okay. But you just can't come in off the street as a student without filling out that form.
Correct.
And saying that I want to just go to your CCRI.
Correct.
Thank you, Ms. Sharon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're quite welcome. Chairwoman Diaz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sharon, referring to page 2, slide 3 again, and Representative Ruggiero stole my question, but I have a little bit more. On top of demonstrating that the students are committed to remaining in Rhode Island after graduation, how the college, and you mentioned that the president will be here, how the students demonstrate that they will remain on track to graduate? Because sometimes I heard the students take advantage of the 2 years free tuition and forget about it. And I expecting how the presidents to answer the question, Sharon. But I'm intrigued by that part.
So on the second part, that's evaluated every semester, so the state's not going to pay if the student does not qualify and remain on track to graduate.
And my second question is about, in reference to slide 4, and is the 1, 2, 3, 4 statement, students with disability remain eligible taking less than 12 credits. Is the last of the statement, the last one, related to that one? That says CCRI update policy to be based on numbers of credit, not years. Is referring to students with disabilities?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to be clear because one of the statements for the student promise is that the student has to show that they in track with credit and everything, and that part blew me away because I couldn't relate it to. So thank you.
Yes.
Okay, you're quite welcome. Any other questions of Sharon before we get into the, okay. What we'll do now is that I know Director Warmer he's got his earphones on. He's been listening to all of the questions that have come up. And as usual, before we do that, I want to make sure that the attendance is positive for Chairman Amore, Rev Diaz, thank you, yeah, Rev Nardone and Rev Quattrochi. They're all here either via Zoom or in the building. So, and oh yeah, and I'm assuming I can see most of you. They're voting in the presence on holding all bills for further study, so they're in it. I can see most of them on the screen here. Okay, so Jonathan, Director Warmer, you heard as usual some of the questions that came up, and I know you have your crew with you. So if you wanted to take those before you do your remarks, if you wanted to do your remarks and then take those questions to get those out of the way before we have other questions that may come from that. So it's the normal routine.
Thank you, Chairman. Happy to be here tonight. So tonight we have from CCRI President Megan Hughes and Vice President for Student Affairs Sarah Enright, and then also from URI on the two capital items, Ryan Carrillo, the Director of Planning and Real Estate Development. But if it's okay with you, Chairman, I'd like to turn it over to President Megan Hughes to make a statement, and then she and Vice President Enright can answer some of the questions on Promise, since that seems like it was the majority of the discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I welcome President Hughes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
I certainly can. I can hear you and I can see you.
Okay,
Oh, there we
terrific.
are. There you go.
Thank you so much. And before I begin, I wanted to just take a few minutes to really thank the Speaker Shekarchi, for introducing this legislation. I'd like to thank the other sponsors of the legislation, and we'd like to thank Governor McKee for putting the Promise Scholarship into his budget proposal. Finally, we'd like to thank our Faculty Senate who have endorsed their support for this legislation, and I know that they sent that support to your committee. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee. What I thought I would do very, very briefly is present just a very high-level overview of the scholarship program. Obviously, Sharon did an excellent job of walking you through the financial history. And then what I'd like to do is turn it over to Vice President Enright to provide additional detail about the legislation and the college's both enrollment and graduation outcomes since the program launched. So if I were to simply go back to the legislation when it was originally authored, the legislation declares that the purpose of the scholarship is to meaningfully increase access to college for Rhode Islanders and to increase graduation, the number of Rhode Islanders who are actually graduating from college. And so if we look at both of those principles and ask ourselves, well, has the Rhode Island Promise program met the spirit of the legislation? I think what we can see is it certainly has. So if we go back to the fall of 2016, we had 1,100 students that fit the elements of this cohort. So the fall of 2016 is the last fall prior to the launch of the Promise Scholarship Program. And we had 1,100 students who completed their high school degree that previous spring and who then enrolled in the fall of 2016 full-time at the community college. And so what we know when we look at just that element, so did in fact the Rhode Island Promise Scholarship positively impact enrollment? We see that it did. The scholarship has led to a more than doubling since its inception. The numbers, Sharon shared them with you, but in the very first year, we saw it move to 1584, and by the second year, we saw that doubling, 2337. By the third year, 2599, and this most recent year, September, predictably, we did see a slight downturn that is in keeping with the overall college-wide decline we saw in enrollment because of the pandemic. So in terms of increasing access, we know it has done that. Vice President Enright will go into a little bit more detail with the committee. I think it could be helpful. With respect to graduation, what do we know? We know that the scholarship has really catalyzed so much energy at the college and contributed in what we believe is a vitally important way to improving how we're graduating our students. If we look at what the college's graduation rate looked like prior to Promise, we know that we were significantly below the national average, both with our 2-year graduation rate and our 3-year graduation rate. And what we know now is that with both of those, the 2-year graduation rate and the 3-year graduation rate, we are meaningfully above. We have more than quadrupled our 2-year graduation rate with the sort of energy of Promise, and we have doubled our 3-year graduation rate. Those kinds of rates put the Community College of Rhode Island and our graduates very near the top of New England community colleges. And we really believe that the work that our faculty and our staff have done with our students to achieve those outcomes would not have been possible without the Rhode Island Promise Scholarship Program. And it's one of the reasons we're so grateful. When I think about why the program has value to Rhode Island, I think about it as an economic development strategy. I think about how often we hear Rhode Island companies, employers really needing an effectively trained workforce, and we know that by graduating many more Rhode Islanders from college, we are able to be part of that pipeline. So I believe that the Promise program can be and can continue to be a very powerful tool for contributing to that workforce, and we're again grateful to be part of that contribution. Lastly, with respect to why removing the sunset clause is so important, I think in the end it comes down to very simply, should this legislation be passed, what it will make possible for Rhode Island families for the future, for those families that have young children in elementary school, all the way up to those families who right now have students in high school. It's removing that barrier of affording tuition and making it a possibility for Rhode Island families to really see a path to college. And we believe that by being able to send that message, that Rhode Island is committing to 2 years of community college tuition as a last dollar scholarship, once all other means, including federal dollars for Pell funding, have been exhausted, that it creates something for Rhode Island students and young people to shoot for. So we believe this is a real opportunity, and we're grateful to you and to the committee for considering it. What I'd love to do now, before we move to the questions, is turn it over to Vice President Enright to make just a couple of remarks, both relating to the access, so the enrollment piece, and then the outcomes, the graduation piece. So Sarah, let me turn it over to you.
Sure, thank you. And thank you everyone for giving out this opportunity tonight and just for your support over the past 4 years or so for this program. My goal tonight is to quickly walk through the enrollment and outcomes data. I'll start with enrollment. There are really two ways that we think about whether or not Promise has positively impacted college enrollment for our state and our institution. So the first is to look we look first at our college. So I'll tell you first about enrollment data at Ccri, and those trends have been overwhelmingly positive. So we have seen 106% growth between 2016 and 2020 of this population, first-time, full-time, straight from high school Rhode Islanders. So even with a slight dip from the pandemic, we have more than doubled enrollment of these students coming straight out of high school, which I think is precisely what we wanted to do with this policy. Now, if all portions of that cohort were growing at the same rate, every other number I would report is 106%. What I would say is the good news is that, in fact, low-income students and students of color have grown at an even faster rate in their enrollment. So while the overall growth of the program has been 106%, the growth of Pell-funded, or our proxy for low-income students, has been 112%, and the growth for students of color has been 155%. So again, to the extent that the goal of this program is to open up our doors as wide as we can and welcome in all Rhode Islanders, and particularly make sure we're welcoming in those Rhode Islanders who have historically lacked access to higher education, I think the policy is doing just that. I did say there are two ways that we think about enrollment, or think about whether we're supporting college access for Rhode Island. The first is that very institutional look that I just shared with our own Ccri enrollment data. The other is just to look at Rhode Island high school graduates generally and say, are more of them going to college? And the resounding answer to that is yes. So the source that we look to for that information is Rhode Island Kids Count. And they have shared that over the course of Promise, we have strong granular data for the first 2 years of Promise showing that the college going rate went up by 8 percentage points in the first 2 years when Promise had its big growth. So what that means is out of every 100 Rhode Island high school graduates, 8 more made their way to college through this program. So that's the kind of uptick that you rarely see in that sort of number. It tends to be very steady. So I think that, again, Promise has not only positively impacted enrollment at the community college, but you see it in the overall number of high school graduates choosing to go directly to college, which I think is exactly what we wanted to do with this policy. So that's the first goal. The second goal of the legislation was to accelerate timely completion at Ccri. We all recognize it's not good enough to just enroll students in college, and I think it was Representative Diaz who was sharing just that. Like, let's make sure that students are not only enrolling, but that they are moving toward completion as sort of quickly and aggressively as they can. And that's where information, again, has been quite positive. Prior to Promise, Ccri's 2-year graduation rate of first-time, full-time students had a 5-year average of 4%. that rate is now at 18% and has been at 18% for the past 2 years. So 4% to 18% with Rhode Island Promise as the huge driver of that is dramatic change. And again, those changes are being seen in a positive fashion across all segments of the cohort. So if you look at low-income students or our Pell-funded students, that rate has gone from a 3% two-year graduation rate to 12%. If you look at students of color, that two-year graduation rate has gone from 2% to 11%. So I think we want to continue to do better with every student in this cohort and only get stronger. But I will say in just the first few years of this program, going from 4 to 18, 3 to 12, and 2 to 11 is really significant in the world of higher education. And those trends are carrying forward in the 3-year graduation rate, which has doubled, has gone from 15 to 30% for all first-time, full-time students, has gone from 12 to 25% for our Pell-funded students, and has gone from 8 to 21% for students of color. So I think that our sense or our analysis would show that this policy is meeting its 2 legislative goals in its early years. And I'm happy, along with President Hughes, to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. Did you have a question? Representative Baginski has a question for you, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a quick question about the changes in the size of the cohorts. It looks like some students disenroll, and I'm wondering if you have any data about where those students are going and whether or not they might be transferring to a 4-year college or continuing their education at a different place.
Sure, I'm happy to take that at a high level, and I'm also happy to send you the extensive report that we did in, I think, April of 2020, which may be a little bit out of date, but provides a far more granular answer to this question than I can provide tonight. The short story is, yes, some are transferring, some are going straight to the workforce, and some are stopped out of college for some period of time. And with that population, we work very hard to get them back in college. So I don't have exact percentages to share of those students who don't return, who's going where, but I'm happy to follow up and provide that report, which provides much more detail and answer to that question.
Thank you very much. Chairwoman Ruggiero, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Vice President Enright. I had asked a question originally. One of the requirements of the recipients of the promise is that they are committed to stay in Rhode Island after graduation. So could you share with us what the tracking mechanism is and what the criteria is and how we know that they're staying in Rhode Island and you know, what maybe perhaps jobs they're going to after they graduate?
Sure, I'm happy to speak to that one. So all students sign a form at the outset before they're able to receive any state funding. In addition to the FAFSA, in addition to the application, they fill out a Rhode Island Promise attestation form in which they attest to their understanding of and commitment to each of the requirements of the program. And in addition to the pieces around full-time enrollment and the 2.5 GPA, et cetera, they sign on to say that they understand a requirement of this scholarship is that they stay and work and live in Rhode Island. So there isn't a, excuse me?
Is there a time limit, like they have to stay for 6 months or a year, or is it just open-ended?
It is not prescribed, it is open-ended.
Okay.
And I think the reality is the vast majority of Ccri graduates stay in our state. So we have not set up an explicit tracking mechanism, but I think as we track our graduates overall, we feel confident that there are very few who are leaving Rhode Island.
Okay. And then just one final question, and you may have answered it, but I'm just trying to get my head around the numbers. In fall of 2016, we had 1,100 students who enrolled in the Promise program. Of that original cohort, how many did graduate? Is there a percentage or number?
Sure, I'm happy to field that one. The 1,100 is actually what we call the comparison cohort. So the fall of 2016 is the year just prior to the implementation of Rhode Island Promise. So there are 1,100 students who would have qualified for Rhode Island Promise had it existed. The very first Rhode Island Promise cohort is actually in the fall of 2017. There were 1,584 of those students, and 306 of those students graduated in the first 2 years. I would have to look. I was most focused on the 2-year tonight because that's what's specifically called out in the legislation.
Yeah.
I can go on and provide you with the 2.5, the 3, the forward-looking numbers. But I know that that cohort had a 19% two-year graduation rate and a 30% three-year graduation rate.
Thank you. Well, there's no doubt the policy has increased college and graduation, and it's a terrific program. Thank you, and thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I've got a question for you. It was the same one I asked at the beginning. The general grade point average is 2.5, and that was something that we discussed for a real long time before the law was passed. And I think my assumption was that 2.5 would be a general GPA. But if you are there programs at CCRI that are part of the Promise program, but it requires a grade point average higher than 2.5? That's the first question. Does anybody have a straight answer to that?
I'm happy to take that one, or President Hughes can. The short answer is yes. There are nursing, for example, has a 2.7 minimum, and in fact, because it's competitive entry, your average nursing admitted student has an even higher GPA than that required minimum.
Okay, and that's something that all the instructors and the school knows. The reason I asked that question is because I get questioned about that all of the time. That from not from a lot of students, but from some who will write or call and say, I'm in the nursing program and my GPA is 2.4, 2.5, or 2.7, whatever it is. But then from their perspective, they're told, well, it's got to be higher than that if you want to stay in this particular program. I'm just trying to make sure that systematically what we put into law is still holding, and then if it's not, did we miss something?
Sure. I'm happy to take this one, and then President Hughes may have
Okay.
more that she'd like to add. But just on the specifics or the mechanics of nursing admissions, nursing, I like to say, it's like trying to get into medical school. It is competitive, and students know that that is the case. So as the Vice President of Student Affairs in my role, I would say that students who do not get into the nursing program are probably the number one type of student issues that get escalated to me, because it is a very competitive application process. So students take 3 prerequisite courses, they have a minimum GPA, and then once you have hit that bar of the minimum GPA and the 3 prerequisites with the minimum grade, then you go into competitive entry, and still many students are not admitted to the nursing program. And so that, I wouldn't say that is dissonant with the Rhode Island Promise law, because each, various scholarships, including federal Pell and other programs, have their own academic requirements associated with them. But I think nursing and some of our healthcare programs are very competitive.
So the excuse me, the real question is that we do have a system that's used at CCRI to make sure that all students are treated fairly in that process. I mean, either a student can do this or they can't, but I just want to make sure there is a system in place for that to happen, because I do know of a few cases where I've just been asked that question. I want to make sure I understood it. Okay, Rep. Barrows, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So, Sarah, just to follow up on Chairman Abney's question, so are there just one additional program that requires a greater GPA, or are there any number of programs that would require that?
It's a good question. We have several. So we have a set of programs called performance-based health sciences. The ones that first come to mind are nursing, dental hygiene, radiography. There are more than a dozen of those programs that have separate competitive entry requirements. I do not know all of them off the top of my head. Nursing is the largest, so the minimum GPA and the prereqs in nursing are very much just part of my daily knowledge. I would have to do more, just kind of going back to the team to provide you with the list of all those programs and their associated entry requirements.
That's great, because that actually clarifies a lot of things. Like Chairman Abney, I personally did not know that there were that many other courses that require a GPA higher. And I think particularly the programs that you just mentioned, nurses, dental hygienists, and all of those are folks that make relatively good money. And some of the folks that you're getting in may not necessarily qualify for those programs. But thank you, Sarah, very much for that explanation.
Welcome. Thank you.
Absolutely. My question was answered, President Hughes. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to that, but okay, yeah. Good deal.
Not at all, only to say we'd be happy to follow up with your office and any other members of the committee where we would lay that out and you'd have it in front of you in writing. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You're welcome. Okay, are there any other questions of the panelists there now?
Chairman.
Okay. We have two. First, I think Rep. Quattrochi and then Representative Gregory. Rep. Quattrochi, you're next, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. So the courses that require a higher GPA, do the Promise students gravitate towards that, or do we have data, or do you keep data on, do they gravitate towards those courses, or do they bypass them?
It's a great, sorry, Representative, it's a little bit hard doing this on WebEx, so I'm going to ask Vice President Enright to follow up. I think very broadly, though, what I would say is we see our Rhode Island Promise scholars are pretty descriptive mirror of what we see more generally at the college. And what I would mean by that is they're enrolled really across the spectrum of the kinds of academic and career pathways we offer. And I know Sarah can speak in more detail, but I would say, I would not say that we see Rhode Island Promise students sort of overwhelmingly headed in these programs that require a higher GPA. So Sarah, I don't know if you have additional context for the representative.
No, I don't have any data on that specific topic to add. I would just share what you shared, President Hughes, that I think they're distributed across all parts of the college. I don't believe they gravitate toward any one path among the many options, but we can get some data on that for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think that would really be helpful in knowing, especially since we're talking about eliminating a sunset, and in regards to that, I mean, if the sunset is not eliminated, it doesn't necessarily mean the program's not going to be funded, correct?
Well, I think that I don't think that would be up to us. It would be up to the governor's budget and the legislature to decide whether it wanted to continue funding it as it has over the first several years. In terms of representative, the significant number of Pell-funded students, certainly we would continue with those students, but we would certainly require the state funding in order to cover the students as they traditionally have been over the last 4 years.
Right. And you wouldn't stop coming to advocate for funding, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So one more question. How many other states in New England have this type of so-called Promise program?
So Sarah really has been our architect, and I can tell you broadly, when we were designing the program after the legislation was written, we looked closely at Tennessee, and then at the Detroit Promise, and then out west at the Oregon Promise. Since that time, many other states on the East Coast have followed those examples, including our own. I know you asked about New England, but most recently, we've seen it unfold in New Jersey and in Virginia. That's just in the last year or so. What I would say broadly about New England is that many of our community college colleagues are offering some kind of state-funded tuition assistance. As to the ones that are called Promise programs, I think Sarah would be a better person to respond more broadly. But I think at the highest level, we are seeing these programs across the United States, and we certainly hope that we'll see more in New England. Sarah, do you have anything to add on specifically the New England piece?
Sure. I would just say that fundamentally Promise programs have mushroomed both state programs and municipal programs, so they've become a little bit harder to track. But the ones that are most noteworthy in our region are the New York Excelsior Scholarship, which is a Promise-like program, and the Connecticut Promise program, which I believe is in its, I want to say it's in its first year. It might be in its second year right now, but I'm quite certain that I think it's its first year. And then I think that there is some form of a municipal program in Boston, but I will be honest that I don't know very much about that one. But we have some partners both at MDRC, which is a national research organization, and the Campaign for Free College Tuition, who periodically try to keep us updated on how these Promise programs are moving and evolving. So we can check in with them and get you the latest kind of list.
Thank you. And I'm also curious about their GPA requirements.
Yeah, that's a great question. They are all over the map. Having looked at the state and municipal programs that have come forward thus far, there's a pretty broad range of them. But yes, we will definitely get you the latest national research on the programs that exist and the various requirements associated with them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rep. Amore, I see you out there.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it. Good evening, President Hughes. Good evening, Sarah. First, on the point about the programs, the specific programs that require higher GPA, I would imagine if students are entering a nursing program without having to have any remediation in regard to mathematics, where we have most of our remediation, those kids are probably moving through those 2 years pretty good, and I would imagine they're the least of your worries. So I think that might answer some of my colleagues' questions. But my question is about additional support during the pandemic. I know that you have built in over the course of this program supports for the Promise students and for every student. We've talked about that extensively. What additional supports have been built in during the pandemic to help what I know as a K-12 educator has been challenging, to say the least? So what has CCRI done to ensure that these students are supported like their previous counterparts were, but obviously in person?
Thank you, Representative. Sarah, why don't I begin, and then whatever, if you'd like more, Representative, let Sarah know and she'll follow up. It's a very helpful question. We've been fortunate in two ways. If we're talking specifically about our Promise scholars, you will remember that we received a gift through our foundation that provided that additional wraparound support, intensified support for our Pell eligible Promise students. In addition to that, with the pandemic, for all of our students, not just our Promise students, we've had now three bills coming out of DC, three packages coming out of DC, excuse me, that we have put directly into our students' pockets for emergency relief. So that started back this summer with the CARES dollars. That was, the college received $10 million, $5 million to mitigate the additional expenses for moving online and running an online institution. The other $5 million going right to students to cover, the basic human needs that I know you well understand. So food, tuition, transportation, childcare, all of that. In addition, we undertook significant fundraising through the foundation to cover additional costs that weren't covered. Things like technology. I think in the first 30 days of the pandemic, we released more than 700 digital devices, whether those are Chromebooks or laptops. I know you know it well because you're in East Providence. Our students' mental health has really been challenged this year. I talk to students every single week. I know you do also. Going to college in your bedroom is really tough. We have made investments, strategic investments in our social work area. We've stood up an office of social and community resources that's under Sarah and Wright in student services. And with our future CARES dollars, we're really going to be putting those resources towards intensified tutoring, intensified mental health support. And when I look at where we are, our anticipation is this will be really a 24-month climb out. And so I really appreciate your question. It indicates you know the challenges that our students are facing.
So I appreciate that, President. And Sarah, you're off the hook. I think the President did a good job with that. But it's important that the public knows that and knows where that federal money has been spent and to what end. So I think it's really something we need to keep an eye on going forward. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Chairwoman Diaz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Chairman. President Hughes, I have a question for you, and also is part of a conversation we had 2 years ago. I was reading the table of data information that you sent it to us based on race and ethnicity. And I was adding those numbers, and I noticed that all students of color, the total is 961. And based on the economic status, because those students that are coming from low-income families take more advantage of the Promise, Students Promise program. Based on that, and bring memories from the past, I remember we had a conversation in the Providence campus about all the programs that you put in place to helping low-income students in top of participating in the Student Promise. I remember you said to me, and I hope you remember too, that in top of providing this information and opportunity to continue college education, also you're providing extra support for those students, because some of them sometimes don't have any way for transportation to college, or basic needs that sometimes some programs in Ccri can provide. So my question to you, those programs are still in place? Are you continue to helping those students not to quit, not to drop out based on other needs they may face during the process attending college?
So thank you, Representative Diaz. And again, I'll ask Sarah to follow up. This is the part of the college that she oversees, and I think it would be helpful for her to provide additional detail. I do remember that conversation at the Liston campus. And I'd start first with a reference I made in responding to Representative Amore's question, and that is when we launched the program, we knew that our Pell students who are predominantly first-generation college students and who are come from low-income families, that they would need additional support beyond the tuition support that the Pell dollars provide. And so we did raise money through our foundation to provide additional support for our Promise scholars, and are continuing to work in tight partnership with our foundation in order to make sure that those students get the additional resources they need. And that is, additional check-ins with an advisor, a dedicated advisor, to make sure that they are staying on track. I have a group of students I work with. One of them this year is a Promise student, and I can say his advisor is a Providence campus advisor. And if I'm not on the phone with that student, the advisor is. So we share your recognition of the importance of doing more than paying the tuition costs, which is obviously centrally important. When I was answering Representative Amore's question, I talked about this Office of Social and Community Resources, which is really designed to be a collective impact model. So our goal is to make sure that our students know easily and have our support, the college's support, in being connected to community resources for all the things I know you understand very well. So support for childcare, support for access to food. With respect to food, we stood up a food pantry, again in partnership with our foundation. We have kept that up and running throughout the pandemic, of course adjusted for COVID, but we know that has been vitally important for many of our students. the funding that I referred to in the earlier question that has come out of Washington has been absolutely essential for our college and is going to allow us, as we continue to recover, to make the kind of support that is essential. So additional tutoring, additional mental health resources, additional connection to food and to stable housing and to transportation. And so I think it actually is a reflection of the tight community that Rhode Island is, that so many state agencies and community-based organizations have stood up and come together to support our students, and we're committed to continuing to do that. Sarah, I don't know if there's anything else you would add to answer Representative Diaz's question.
I think that covers it. I think the only piece that I would add is our distribution of those federal funds has been focused on getting those funds out to our low-income students. So the way that the cash has gone to our student population is in two ways. Low-income students are getting immediate awards of those federal funds, and students who are experiencing financial hardship but may not show up on the FAFSA as having financial need are able to apply and explain that they are experiencing pandemic-related financial hardship. But what that means is the bulk of that funding has gone directly into the hands of our low-income students, because we know they are struggling disproportionately amid this pandemic.
Mr. Chairman, can I follow up with 2 seconds?
Yeah, and then Rep. Bella Wilkinson had a question.
Yes, it's
You
related
can do
to
a
the
follow-up,
conversation.
yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'm very pleased that the college is taking a step to supporting students. That way we can keep them in college. But I would like to recommend very humbly that through the CRF, the Corona Release Funds, we have a lot of funding to assisting families for rental difficulties that they may facing right now. So some students maybe don't referring to that, but housing insecurity is one of the biggest reasons why students drop out. So please, President, keep in mind that Rhode Island Housing have extra funding right now that can be tied to all those services and programs that you're providing to students. And that will be part of keeping students in track. So thank you so much, and I will be more than happy to see you again in person.
Thank you very much. Rep. Bella Wilkinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Megan, let me ask you a quick question, please. I'm not sure whether or not it's been asked this evening already. If it has, I apologize. I'm curious about what type of accommodations we're providing for students who have either physical or intellectual limitations and as a result cannot carry a full course load. Is there a place for them in Rhode Island Promise? And if you are, what type of accommodations are you providing for them, please?
Thank you, Representative Ella Wilkinson. The question has not been asked, and what I'd like to ask is, Sarah, can you please walk the representative through what our accommodations policy look like with the Promise program?
Sure, I'm happy to. I think that there are two types of accommodations that are relevant here. One is, what sort of accommodations would we provide for any student in order to be successful at CCRI and to navigate with whatever their disability might be. So our Disability Support Services Office serves our entire student population with any number of different accommodations that might be supports for students who are hard of hearing, physical supports to help a student getting to and from a classroom. The accommodation, so that is one type, supports for all students with disabilities at our college. I think the piece that has come up more recently with respect to Promise is, if a student is unable to pursue a full course load, what are their options under Rhode Island Promise? And so we have always had a program that allows a student to have what's called a reduced course load accommodation. And we have, based on some feedback from students and families with disabilities and the disability community in Rhode Island, made a couple of recent changes to our internal college policy in this space. One change is that we have gone down from 9 credits required as part of a reduced course load to 6, knowing that for some students, even 9 was proving to be a very heavy course load. So that is one shift that we just made and literally published last week. The second shift is that families came to us with what felt like some really appropriate feedback to say, okay, my child is thriving under the reduced course load disability, but you are holding them to a 2-year end date of this scholarship program. But after 2 years, they haven't attempted as many credits as all of the other students. So we feel like we're getting short shrift. So we responded to that feedback and recently made a change to try to come up with something that is more equivalent, because I think that was really valid feedback. So the shift that we've just made and published last week is that students with disabilities will have the opportunity, assuming they meet the GPA requirements and complete their required number of credits each year, they will have the opportunity to attempt 60 credits, which we believe upon reflection is the best equivalent to a student who gets 2 years as a full-time student under Promise. So we have always had this process in place, and we have made those 2 recent modifications based on feedback.
Sarah, what happens to a high school student who does not graduate before the age of 19? Do they still have a place with Rhode Island Promise?
They do, yes. That was one of the ADA requirements that we took into account in the early years. So there's actually a form that you fill out. If you apply and you're applying to Promise and you pop up as having an age above that, you fill out a separate form that says, I believe I should still be eligible for Promise, and I am older than the date because of the following reasons. And I think there are 5 or 6 of them. I don't know them all off the top of my head, but they are something like, I started school late, I had a leave of absence in my K-12 experience, my K-12 experience was slower because of a disability or other circumstances. So we have a number of those students in each Promise cohort.
And then my last question, do you have a swag in terms of what percentage of the Promise graduates actually remain in the state of Rhode Island?
That's a great question. I'm always happy to take a swag at anything. I would say 85, 90%, but that's based on our, what we see in our overall graduates. So but we are on the cusp of doing some more extensive alumni research generally, so we can think about how we might pinpoint Promise students as a part of that work that we're just embarking on with our institutional research group.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
You're quite welcome. Rep. Baginski, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sarah, I have kind of a remedial question. Please forgive my ignorance. Can you tell me about some of the programs that are 2-year degree programs? What are some of the topics? And are any of them specifically related to job training?
Sure. We have 7 career and academic paths, and within those career and academic paths, there are a mix of associate degrees that are primarily designed for transfer to a 4-year institution, and associate degrees that are designed to prepare you for immediate entry to the labor market. So if you look, for example, at our business economics and data analytics pathway, you would see the Associate of Science in Business degree, and there are some sub-concentrations, management, marketing, accounting, et cetera. And those would be sort of practical, ready to get you a job in the business world after your 2-year associate degree. And then you would also see more transfer-oriented plans if you want to head to URI or head to RIC and study business at those institutions. So those would include our our JAA plans or joint admissions agreement plans and other transfer recommendations. And I think your subsequent question was related to professional skills or workforce.
Yeah, are any of the programs related to trades?
We do have some. So we have degrees in cybersecurity. We have degrees in advanced manufacturing. We have several in healthcare that are considered sort of modern day trades, and several in IT that are considered modern day trades. We do not have what some community colleges have with construction or automotive, but
thank you.
Advanced manufacturing is probably the most close to a traditional trades program.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for a great discussion. Are there any other questions for the invited guests before we move on? Okay, thanks again for the great discussion. I think, Jonathan, now we have, do you have anyone else? Because I can go to the phone from here.
Well, just, Chairman, if you want to talk to Ryan Carrillo, there was one, I think, question on the URI projects.
Okay, you can. If what you can do is put Ryan on, and he can explain to us, and we'll see if there are any questions that do come up with that. Ryan, are you there?
Yes, I am, Chairman.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes. Great.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank you and the the members of the committee. I did, as Jonathan has pointed out here, one question from the representatives, the question about third-party insurance payments. So the university does charge third-party insurance companies for services at at the Health Services Center. Approximately 250 companies are charged annually. However, that only represents a small portion of our overall operating. Most of our operating is from student fees for those services. I'm here. I'm happy to answer any other questions that anyone may have.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for Ryan at this particular point? Okay, I think you were also, well, we have two people on the telephones. Is it Paige Parks? Is he there? Okay, Paige, are you on, sir?
All right, excellent. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Rhode Island Kids Count would like to just voice our strong support for Article 1, Section 15, and for House Bill 5224. So Rhode Island Kids Count is the convener of the Rhode Island Alliance for College and Career Readiness. The Alliance identifies and advocates for legislative and regulatory changes and budgetary investments needed to increase college and career readiness and access, and to address racial, ethnic, and income disparities. And the Alliance strongly supports and advocates for the permanence of the Rhode Island Promise Scholarship. So you already heard some really great data from CCRI, but just some additional data to bring to the committee is the strong importance around having a post-secondary degree in Rhode Island. So between the years of 2018 and 2028, jobs requiring a post-secondary degree or certificate are projected to grow faster than jobs requiring less education. And between 2014 and 2018 in Rhode Island, adults with a high school diploma were almost 3 times more likely to be unemployed as compared to those with a bachelor's degree or higher. So making the Rhode Island Promise Scholarship permanent would allow our state to continue to make progress and increase college access, enrollment, and completion by ensuring that our young people have the financial resources they need to enroll in and complete a post-secondary degree or a certificate. So Vice President Enright already shared the really impressive data around how Rhode Island Promise has helped to advance equity. My written testimony also includes some charts that the committee, I'm sure, will be interested in seeing around the immediate college enrollment for both low-income students and for students of color. And these are really amazing equity gains that we should celebrate. And so during COVID-19, we know that this pandemic has greatly impacted communities of color and children of poverty. And we have a great risk and devastating long-lasting effects for these populations, and it's a great risk for us losing these amazing equity gains that this General Assembly has worked so hard to achieve. And that is why it is so important to continue the Rhode Island Promise Scholarship and to make it permanent. We also know that affordability is not the only barrier to increasing Rhode Island's college enrollment and completion rates, but it's a very important one. We also support the governor's proposal to use the governor's emergency education relief funds to expand Rhode Island Promise Scholarship to include working parents, students who have amassed college credits, and students who are unable to enroll in CCRI immediately after high school because of their pandemic. So the Alliance, we are always available to share ideas about how to make the Promise Scholarship the best program it can be, and so that we can help more students achieve their dreams of college and at the same time improve the economic prosperity of our state. So thank you so much for the opportunity to provide testimony today. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Paige. We appreciate that. Any questions of Paige from the panel, please? Okay, thanks. We appreciate it very much, Paige.
Great, thank you.
I think we have, is it Mr. Robert Marshall? Is he online? Getting close. Hi, Robert. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you very
Chair.
much. Yeah, how are you?
Good.
Okay, you're on, sir.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Abney and members of the committee for allowing me to testify on behalf of the Rhode Island Developmental Disabilities Council. We did submit earlier today some written testimony, so I'm not going to tie up a lot of your time. And I'm also glad to hear, I've been listening, and I'm glad to hear that there have been some policy changes recently in the last couple of weeks that have addressed the issues that we're looking at, which is making sure that we're staying in full compliance with the ADA and accommodating students who have intellectual and developmental disabilities or physical disabilities. We know that everybody's been trying, and it's good, but we always worry about the few people that are going to fall through the cracks and not have this access, or put us in a situation where we might unintentionally be not meeting the ADA requirements. So we were asking to make some minor changes while you're taking out the sunset and just codify some of the things that were just discussed about policy relative to course load and length of time and age for starting. We just feel that to codify those things, make it very clear that we are trying to be fully compliant and meet the needs of all students, including those with disabilities. My testimony has language attached to it to show these not extensive changes to the statute that would do that, and we encourage you to take a look at that.
Thanks, Bob. We appreciate all the work that you do, sir. So thanks much for your testimony. Any question to Bob at this point? Okay, thank you, Bob. Does that exhaust the telephone list that we have? It does? Completely. Okay. Well, that's a change for us. But at any rate, thank again for all of the members and the staff that support us in what we're doing, and we really appreciate all of the information that we do get from the general public. But with that said, I think that ends the business of the Finance Committee tonight. Thank you for your attendance.